millionaire abandoned his pregnant housekeeper. But 6 years later, she returns with triplets and shocking secrets. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Atlanta's winter bared its sharpest teeth on that December morning. Letitia Morgan adjusted her gray housekeeping uniform as she climbed the service stairs of the Whitfield mansion in Buckhead, the beating heart of Georgian elite. At 30, she had worked for the Whitfield family for 4 years, keeping their environments immaculate, and for the past 8 months, warming Richard Whitfield's bed. The positive pregnancy test weighed like lead in her pocket. Letitia paused at the top of the stairs, drawing a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart. Through the window, she could see the manicured garden below, its once vibrant roses now dormant under a thin layer of frost. Not unlike how her own dreams had gone into hibernation when she took this job to survive. She continued down the hallway, her sensible shoes silent on the plush carpet. At 42, Richard Whitfield personified power. Salt and pepper hair at the temples, athletic body maintained by daily sessions with personal trainers, and penetrating blue eyes that could seduce or destroy with equal ease. As CEO of the most powerful real estate conglomerate in the American Southeast, his name opened doors that remained firmly closed to people like her. A memory flashed unbidden. Richard cornering her in the library after a fundraising event 3 months ago, his fingers trailing along her arm as he whispered how he'd take care of her if she was good to him. The memory burned like acid. Letitia hesitated outside his private office door, then knocked firmly. "Enter," came his clipped voice. Richard sat behind his massive mahogany desk, signing documents with a fountain pen that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He didn't look up immediately. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt inside. Richard raised his eyes from the papers, surprise transforming to contempt in seconds. "Are you sure it's mine?" he asked with clinical coldness. "You know it is," Letitia responded, feeling the first blow of humiliation. "I haven't been with anyone else." Richard laughed, a sound empty of humor. "A housekeeper with ambitions, is that it? Think you'll secure your future this way?" "I didn't come asking for anything, Richard. I just thought you should know." He stood, imposing in his $12,000 Italian suit. "You're nothing but a maid I made a mistake with. I won't risk my empire for someone as disposable as you," he declared, opening a drawer and removing an envelope. "There's $10,000 here. Take care of your problem?" Letitia felt as if she'd been slapped. "I'm not aborting my child." His eyes narrowed. "My family would never accept blood like yours in our lineage. Be realistic, Letitia. You have no formal education, no connections, nothing to offer a child except a life of limitations." Each word hit Letitia like a blade. She thought of her mother, who had worked as a domestic helper until she died of untreated cancer. She thought of her absent father, whom she'd never known. "Take the money and leave," Richard continued. "If you try any legal action, I'll destroy you. I have judges, politicians, and the press in my pocket. No one will believe a black housekeeper against the Whitfield name." Letitia stood frozen, dignity her only shield as Richard's words cut through her last illusions about what had transpired between them. "You're dismissed, Letitia. Permanently." He returned to his papers, as if she had already vanished. As she left the office, Letitia encountered Eleanor Whitfield in the hallway. The 65-year-old matriarch observed her with a thin smile on her red-painted lips. "I always knew you were too ambitious for your own good," Eleanor commented. "Women like you always try to climb socially through the bedroom." Letitia kept her dignity as she collected her few belongings from the small room near the kitchen where staff could rest during breaks. She folded her spare uniform with trembling hands, refusing to give Eleanor the satisfaction of seeing her cry. As she passed through the mansion's gates, she noticed Eleanor speaking with the security guard, ensuring her access would be permanently revoked. The cold December air bit through her thin coat, but the chill in her heart ran deeper. That night, in her small apartment in College Park, Letitia cried until she had no more tears. She counted pennies to pay the overdue rent, knowing that without references, finding another job would be nearly impossible. The envelope with Richard's money remained untouched on her table, its presence both insulting and tempting in her desperate situation. As she emptied her purse, searching for any forgotten bills, Letitia found an envelope she didn't recognize. Inside was a will and a handwritten note. "To ensure your silence, Eleanor." The document revealed that the Whitfield patriarch, who had died a decade ago, had established that any direct descendant of Richard, regardless of maternal origin, would be entitled to part of the family fortune. Eleanor had hidden this clause from her own son. Letitia read the document 3 times, understanding slowly dawning. This wasn't kindness from Eleanor. It was insurance, a way to keep Letitia quiet by giving her something to lose if she spoke up. The matriarch had correctly assessed that Richard would reject her, but had prepared this backup plan in case Letitia proved more troublesome than expected. In the following months, Letitia lived through hell. Pregnant and unemployed, she worked as a supermarket cashier during the day and waitressed at night. She slept only 4 hours nightly, her feet swollen and back aching. She ate minimally to ensure the baby received adequate nutrition. In her 4th month, she discovered she was expecting triplets. She fainted during her night shift at the restaurant and was fired for concerning the customers. She nearly lost her apartment, saved only by the kindness of an elderly neighbor who shared food and medicine. When the babies were born prematurely, Letitia finally used Richard's $10,000 to pay the hospital. 3 identical boys, each with the same penetrating blue eyes as their father. She named them Malcolm, Martin, and Marcus, in honor of the leaders she admired. In the hospital, when a nurse asked about the father, Letitia made her decision. Looking at the 3 sleeping babies, she made a solemn promise. "One day, you'll have everything you deserve, and Richard Whitfield will kneel before the empire we're going to build together." While reading the document by the dim light of her bedside lamp, Letitia couldn't imagine that this paper, left by an enemy, would be the first piece of the empire that would one day make Richard Whitfield kneel before her and the children he rejected. The document in Letitia's hands represented both threat and opportunity. As she placed it carefully in a worn folder, she couldn't imagine the roller coaster her life would become in the months ahead. 2 weeks after her confrontation with Richard, morning sickness hit with merciless intensity. "I need this job," Letitia pleaded, hunched over a trash can in the supermarket break room. Her supervisor, a thin woman with perpetually pursed lips, stood in the doorway with arms crossed. "I understand your situation is difficult, but customers don't want to see their cashier rushing to the bathroom every hour. It makes them nervous." "It will pass. Just the first trimester," Letitia promised, though she had no idea if that was true. The supervisor sighed. "Look, I'll try to schedule you during slower periods. Just try to control it better." Control it better, as if pregnancy was something she could command like a trained dog. Letitia nodded anyway, grateful for even this small concession. By evening, she was at her second job, serving tables at a family restaurant in a strip mall. Her feet throbbed inside worn sneakers, and her back screamed with each tray she carried. The meager tips barely covered her bus fare and a portion of her mounting bills. "You look dead on your feet, honey," remarked a regular customer, an elderly man who always ordered the meatloaf special. "Just tired," Letitia smiled weakly, refilling his water glass. "You taking care of yourself? You're eating for 2 now." Her hand froze. "How did you—" "My wife carried 5 children." I recognized the look. He slipped an extra $20 under his plate. "Get yourself some protein." That night, Letitia collapsed onto her bed fully clothed, too exhausted to change. 4 hours later, her alarm would ring for the morning shift. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach, wondering how she would manage when it began to grow. "We'll figure it out," she whispered to the darkness. 3 weeks later, Letitia sat nervously in a community clinic waiting room filling out assistance forms. Her pen hovered over the father's information section. After a moment's hesitation, she wrote, "Unknown." The shame of the lie burned, but not as much as the memory of Richard's cold eyes. "Morgan?" a tired-looking nurse called. "Room 3. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, moved the ultrasound wand over Letitia's abdomen. Suddenly, her expression changed. "Ms. Morgan, I'm seeing something interesting here." Letitia's heart clenched. "Is something wrong with my baby?" "Not wrong," the doctor replied slowly. "But I'm detecting multiple heartbeats." "Multiple? You mean twins?" The doctor adjusted the wand, studying the screen. "Actually, I'm seeing 3 distinct fetuses. You're carrying triplets, Ms. Morgan." The room seemed to tilt. "Triplets? That's not possible." "It's uncommon, but very possible. Identical triplets from the look of it." The doctor turned the screen. "See these 3 shapes? Each one is a developing baby." Letitia stared at the blurry images, 3 tiny beings floating in darkness. 3 babies, 3 mouths to feed, 3 college educations to somehow provide. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't possibly." "There are options," the doctor said gently. "Services that can help. This is a high-risk pregnancy, so you'll need excellent prenatal care." Letitia nodded mechanically, but her mind was calculating impossible math. Her tiny apartment had barely enough room for her, let alone 3 infants. Her jobs barely covered her own expenses. And her body, how would it sustain 3 growing lives when she could barely afford proper nutrition for herself? 2 nights later, the inevitable happened. During the dinner rush, while carrying a tray loaded with entrees, dizziness overwhelmed her. The room spun, plates crashed, and Letitia found herself on the floor, mortified as customers stared. "I'm sorry," she told her manager afterward, still shaky. "I just need a break." "What I need is reliable staff," he replied coldly. "We can't have servers collapsing and frightening customers. I'm sorry, but this isn't working out." The dismissal notice felt like a physical blow. 1 job gone, half her income vanished overnight. Within a week, the supermarket followed suit. "Your morning absences are affecting our checkout efficiency," her supervisor explained with rehearsed corporate sympathy. "Perhaps when your situation resolves, we can reconsider." When her situation resolves, as if her pregnancy was a temporary inconvenience like a sprained ankle. That evening, Letitia stared at the eviction notice taped to her door. 30 days to pay or vacate. The room blurred through her tears. A gentle touch on her shoulder startled her. Mrs. Jenkins, her elderly neighbor, stood in the hallway, concern etching her weathered face. "Bad news, child?" The kindness in her voice broke Letitia's last defenses. She crumpled against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably. Mrs. Jenkins guided her into her own apartment, settled her on a worn but clean sofa, and brought her tea with honey. "Now then, tell me what's happening." Through halting breaths, Letitia explained everything: the pregnancy, the triplets, the lost jobs, the looming homelessness. "Triplets!" Mrs. Jenkins exclaimed. "Lord have mercy! And the father?" Letitia looked away. "Not in the picture." Mrs. Jenkins didn't press. Instead, she said, "I taught elementary school for 43 years. Seen it all. Know what I learned? The ones everyone underestimates often surprise us the most." That night, Mrs. Jenkins shared her dinner, a hearty vegetable stew with cornbread, and insisted Letitia take prenatal vitamins from her own cabinet. "Left from when my daughter was expecting. No arguments." Over the following weeks, a fragile routine emerged. Mrs. Jenkins helped with grocery shopping and shared meals. Letitia spent days at the public library, researching affordable housing programs and studying books on business and real estate development between filling job applications that went nowhere. As her belly grew, so did her determination. Each rejection letter and unanswered call hardened something inside her. Each night, she studied the Whitfield testamentary clause by lamplight, forming the outline of a plan. "These babies won't just be my responsibility," she told Mrs. Jenkins one evening, hands resting on her expanding middle. "They'll be my strength." While caressing her belly that housed 3 lives, Letitia didn't know she was gestating not just triplets, but also the seed of a business revolution that would transform Atlanta and bring Richard Whitfield back into her life in ways he could never predict. The sharp pain began at midnight, waking Letitia from a fitful sleep. At first, she dismissed it as the normal discomfort of carrying triplets at 7 months. By dawn, the intervals between contractions had shortened alarmingly. She gripped the edge of her bed, panic rising as a wet warmth spread beneath her. "Too early," she whispered, fumbling for her phone. "Please, not yet." Mrs. Jenkins found her collapsed in the hallway, trying to reach the older woman's apartment. One look at Letitia's ashen face and the puddle beneath her told the story. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Jenkins gasped, immediately dialing emergency services. "My neighbor's in premature labor with triplets. We need an ambulance now." While they waited, Mrs. Jenkins helped Letitia back to her bed, gathering the small hospital bag she'd prepared weeks earlier. "Breathe through it, child. Help is coming." "They can't come yet," Letitia moaned, clutching her swollen belly. "They're too small." The ambulance arrived within minutes, though to Letitia it felt like hours. Paramedics worked efficiently, strapping her to a gurney while firing questions about her medical history. "Any health insurance?" one asked as they loaded her into the ambulance. Letitia shook her head, another contraction stealing her breath. The Medicaid application she'd submitted weeks ago remained pending. "County hospital then," the paramedic decided, nodding to his partner. Atlanta Memorial's emergency room was chaos incarnate. Gunshot victims, heart attacks, and drug overdoses competed for attention. Letitia waited on a gurney in a crowded hallway, contractions intensifying while a harried nurse occasionally checked her progress. "First baby," the nurse muttered after 4 hours. "Still time." "Triplets," Letitia corrected through gritted teeth. The nurse's eyes widened. "Why didn't you say so?" Within minutes, Letitia was rushed to labor and delivery, doctors suddenly materializing around her. 30 weeks gestation, triplets, no prenatal records on file, a resident announced, scanning her hastily completed forms. "Blood pressure rising," another voice noted. "Fetal distress in baby B." The attending physician, a woman with tired eyes and decisive movements, examined Letitia quickly. "We need to perform an emergency C-section, prep or 2. Terror seized Letitia as they wheeled her toward surgery. "My babies, will they survive?" The doctor's face softened momentarily. "We have an excellent NICU. We'll do everything possible." Under harsh operating room lights, Letitia drifted in and out of consciousness as anesthesia took hold. A blue surgical drape separated her from the activity below her chest. The sensation of tugging and pressure felt distant, dreamlike. "First baby coming," the doctor announced. A thin, reedy cry pierced the room's clinical sounds. "Baby A, male, time of birth 7:16 a.m. More pressure, more voices. "Baby B, male, 7:17 a.m. The third cry was weaker than the others. "Baby C, male, 7:18 a.m. All to NICU stat." Letitia caught only glimpses of 3 tiny forms, impossibly small, before they were whisked away in portable incubators. Each glimpse revealed a shock of dark hair and skin several shades lighter than her own. "Can I see them?" she asked weakly as the surgical team closed her incision. A nurse briefly returned with the 3 incubators, positioning them where Letitia could see each tiny face. "They're fighters," the nurse said kindly, all weighing just over 3 pounds. Through tears, Letitia noted what the nurse surely saw too. 3 identical faces, each bearing the unmistakable blue eyes of Richard Whitfield. The following weeks became a blur of hospital corridors, intimidating medical terminology, and mounting bills. The triplets, housed in plastic boxes, connected to monitors and feeding tubes, fought for every breath. Letitia divided her time between their bedsides, trying to absorb complicated care instructions while facing the financial catastrophe their premature arrival created. "Ms. Morgan?" The hospital administrator's voice was professionally sympathetic. "We need to discuss payment arrangements." The itemized bill made Letitia lightheaded, 6 figures growing daily. "Without insurance coverage, these are your options," the woman continued, sliding a payment plan form across the desk. That evening, Letitia opened the envelope containing Richard's $10,000. Her hands trembled with rage and necessity as she counted the bills that would barely cover the initial NICU expenses. "Your daddy's money?" she whispered bitterly. "Buying your lives after he wanted it to end them?" Nurse Jacobs, a maternal black woman in her 50s, became Letitia's unexpected champion. She taught Letitia how to care for premature babies, demonstrated proper breastfeeding techniques, and occasionally slipped her cafeteria vouchers. "You're stronger than you know," Nurse Jacobs insisted one particularly difficult night when baby Marcus's oxygen levels had dropped dangerously, and these boys need their mama's strength. Mrs. Jenkins rallied their apartment building's residents, organizing a collection for baby supplies and helping prepare Letitia's small apartment for the triplets' eventual arrival. Neighbors donated a used crib, baby clothes, and a rocking chair. "Community takes care of its own," Mrs. Jenkins declared, directing 2 young men from the building as they assembled the crib. After 37 agonizing days in the NICU, the triplets were finally strong enough to go home. Letitia carried each precious bundle separately to the taxi, her heart thundering with equal parts joy and terror at the responsibility she now faced alone. That first night home was brutal. The boys seemed to coordinate their crying in relays, ensuring Letitia never rested more than 20 minutes at a stretch. By dawn, she sat in the rocking chair, tears streaming silently as she cradled Malcolm while Martin and Marcus finally slept. "What have I done?" she whispered to the morning light filtering through her thin curtains. "How will I ever be enough for you?" As the sun rose fully, Letitia laid Malcolm beside his brothers. In sleep, their identical faces looked peaceful, perfect. She traced a finger along each tiny cheek, marveling at their translucent skin and the shock of dark hair they'd all been born with. But it was their eyes, identical piercing blue, unmistakably Whitfield, that caught her attention when they opened. In those eyes, she saw both pain and possibility. Richard's dismissive words echoed, "You have no formal education, no connections, nothing to offer a child except a life of limitations." Gathering her sons in her arms, Letitia made a solemn vow. "One day, you'll have everything you deserve, and Richard Whitfield will kneel before the empire we're going to build together." Observing her sons asleep in their improvised crib, Letitia couldn't predict that 6 years later, she would be signing million-dollar contracts in a boardroom overlooking Atlanta's skyline, paving the way for the confrontation that would forever change the Whitfield legacy. 2 years had passed since that solemn vow made over 3 sleeping infants. Morning sunlight streamed through the freshly washed curtains of Letitia's modestly renovated apartment. At 32, she had developed the skill of typing one-handed while balancing a toddler on her hip, a necessity rather than a choice. "Malcolm, please give Martin back his block," Letitia called without looking up from her laptop. On the living room carpet that doubled as their play space, the 2-year-old triplets engaged in the universal toddler pastime of disputed toy ownership. "Mine," Malcolm protested, clutching the wooden block to his chest. "Share," Letitia reminded him gently but firmly. "Remember what we talked about?" Malcolm considered this moral dilemma for approximately 3 seconds before reluctantly extending the block toward his identical brother. Martin accepted it with a triumphant grin while Marcus, the most observant of the 3, continued methodically stacking his own blocks, occasionally glancing at his brother's drama with mild interest. The living room had been transformed into a makeshift office, A modest desk sat against one wall, surrounded by neatly organized filing cabinets and a whiteboard covered with property listings and contact information. What had once been a dingy apartment was now clean and functional, if not luxurious. Each improvement, fresh paint, repaired flooring, new locks, represented a small victory in Letitia's larger campaign. "Morgan Housing Consultancy," she answered as her phone rang, seamlessly transitioning into her professional voice. "Yes, Mrs. Williams. I've found 3 potential apartments within your budget. I can meet you tomorrow to view them." The business had started by accident. After helping a neighbor navigate Section 8 housing paperwork, word spread through the community about that Morgan woman who knows how to find affordable housing. Soon, Letitia was charging modest consultation fees to help low-income families secure decent homes. Using the Whitfield testamentary document as collateral, she had convinced a skeptical loan officer at Atlanta Community Credit Union to approve a small business loan. The man had examined the document with raised eyebrows. "This appears legitimate, but using it this way is unusual." "I'm not looking to challenge the Whitfield estate," Letitia had explained carefully. "I'm using what I have to build something for my children's future." Late nights had become her university. After putting the boys to bed, Letitia devoured books on urban development, real estate law, and financial planning. Her coffee table overflowed with library books, legal pads filled with notes, and printouts of zoning regulations. "You're going to burn yourself out," Mrs. Jenkins warned one evening, arriving to babysit while Letitia met with clients. The elderly woman had become an indispensable part of their lives, a grandmother figure to the triplets and a steadfast supporter of Letitia's ambitions. "I can sleep when they're in college," Letitia replied with a tired smile, applying a touch of lipstick before grabbing her carefully organized portfolio. By their second birthday, the triplets were already showing distinct personalities and remarkable abilities. Malcolm could complete complex puzzles designed for 5-year-olds, his little fingers arranging pieces with methodical precision. Martin seemed drawn to books, examining pictures intently and mimicking reading by turning pages and babbling expressively. Marcus displayed an uncanny sense of rhythm, turning anything within reach into a percussion instrument. Just like their mama, exceptional, Mrs. Jenkins would say, though Letitia would sometimes catch a glimpse of the boys in certain lights, their blue eyes calculating or curious, and see flashes of Richard instead. The morning that changed everything arrived unannounced. Letitia was helping a client with paperwork when her office phone rang. "Is this Letitia Morgan?" a male voice inquired. "My name is James Patterson. I've heard interesting things about your consultancy." Patterson, she knew immediately, was a significant figure in community real estate development, an African-American entrepreneur who had transformed several struggling neighborhoods through ethical investment. "I'd like to see your operation," he continued. "I'm looking for fresh perspectives on community housing solutions." When Patterson arrived that afternoon, his critical gaze took in the modest office space and the 3 toddlers playing in the cordoned-off area near Letitia's desk. "Your children are here during business hours?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "Child care for triplets costs more than my rent," Letitia replied unapologetically. "My clients understand my situation." Rather than seeming put off, Patterson nodded thoughtfully. Resourcefulness, essential in this business. For the next hour, Letitia outlined her vision while Patterson listened intently. She spoke about dignified, affordable housing, about communities that uplifted rather than warehoused people, about the economic benefits of resident ownership. "You have no formal training in urban development," he noted, examining her hand-drawn proposal for converting abandoned properties. "No," Letitia acknowledged, "but I have lived experience. I know what families need because I've been there. I know which landlords are predatory, which buildings have code violations that never get addressed, which neighborhoods need grocery stores more than luxury condos." Patterson's expression remained unreadable. "There's an abandoned building in Sweet Auburn. Historic neighborhood, significant potential. 20 units could be developed there, but the conventional developers see it as too risky. He slid a photograph across her desk, a brick building with boarded windows and graffiti-covered walls. "What would you do with this?" Letitia studied the image, mind racing. "Preserve the historic facade. Convert the interior to mixed-income housing. Some market rate, some subsidized. Ground-floor commercial space for Black-owned businesses. Maybe a daycare center to support working parents." A slow smile spread across Patterson's face. "That's exactly what I was thinking. Perhaps we should discuss a partnership." The opportunity was exhilarating and terrifying. Success could establish her reputation permanently. Failure could destroy everything she'd built. That night, after the triplets were asleep, Letitia sat at her kitchen table with a calculator, running numbers again and again. The investment required would strain every resource she had. The hours would be punishing. "Is it worth it?" she whispered to herself, thinking of the boys' needs. Malcolm had woken crying when she'd returned home late 3 times that week. Martin had clung to her legs when she'd tried to leave that morning. Marcus had asked, in his developing speech, "Mama stay?" She walked quietly to their bedroom, watching their synchronized breathing in the soft glow of the nightlight. 3 perfect faces, each carrying her hopes and Richard's genetics in equal measure. "I'm building something important for our future," she whispered, adjusting Marcus's blanket. "Something that will give you choices I never had." The next morning, she called Patterson. "I'm in," she said simply. When her hand trembled slightly as she signed the partnership agreement the following week, it wasn't from fear but from the magnitude of what she was beginning. While Letitia hammered the first sign for Morgan Community Development onto the abandoned building's lot, she couldn't imagine that in just 4 years that modest beginning would transform into a multi-million-dollar empire, or that the magazine that would feature her face on its cover would be the same one Richard Whitfield read at his desk every morning. The Sweet Auburn Revival Project, as it came to be known, had done more than transform an abandoned building. It had launched Letitia Morgan into Atlanta's business consciousness. 3 years after hammering that first sign into weathered soil, she stood at the large windows of her downtown office, watching the city she was gradually reshaping. "The Henderson property projections are ready for your review, Ms. Morgan," said her assistant, placing a folder on the polished conference table. At 35, Letitia had developed the poised confidence of someone who had defied impossible odds. Her wardrobe, once comprised of discount store clearance items, now featured tailored suits that complemented her natural elegance without ostentatious designer labels. "Thank you, Denise," she replied, turning from the window. "Is the team ready for the presentation?" The Morgan Community Development Corporation now occupied the entire 14th floor of a mid-tier office building. With 35 employees and 5 successfully revitalized properties in their portfolio, they had become the unexpected success story in Atlanta's urban renewal landscape. Later that morning, Letitia stood before a room of impressed investors, concluding her presentation on their latest affordable housing initiative. The projections showed both social impact and impressive financial returns, the combination that had become her trademark. "Any questions?" she asked, standing confidently beside charts showing how their previous developments had increased both property values and resident well-being. An older white man in an expensive suit leaned forward. "Impressive numbers, Ms. Morgan. But how do you maintain this balance between profitability and accessibility?" "Most developers find these goals mutually exclusive." Letitia smiled. "By rejecting that false dichotomy, Mr. Kavanaugh, our residents become stakeholders, not just tenants. They maintain properties, create community safety networks, and establish businesses that serve local needs. This reduces our operational costs while building community wealth." As the investors filed out, several lingered to shake her hand. James Patterson, now her mentor and friend, gave her a subtle nod of approval. "You're making waves," he remarked after everyone had left. The old guard doesn't quite know what to make of you." "Good," Letitia replied, gathering her materials. "Complacency breeds mediocrity." At the prestigious Atlanta Academy, the 5-year-old Morgan triplets were causing waves of their own. Malcolm sat in the advanced mathematics group solving equations meant for third graders with focused intensity. Across the room, Martin was explaining the metaphor in a poem to his astonished teacher, while in the music room, Marcus played a complex piano piece he had heard just once. "Their aptitude tests are remarkable," the headmaster told Letitia during their quarterly conference. "All 3 score in the exceptional range, but in different areas. It's quite unusual." "They're unusual children," Letitia acknowledged, pride warming her voice. The scholarship that covered their tuition represented another hard-won victory. Letitia could now afford the fees, but had insisted on merit-based scholarships. Her boys would never believe their achievements came from anything but their own abilities. That evening, their modest 3-bedroom apartment in a respectable but unglamorous neighborhood buzzed with activity. Despite her growing success, Letitia maintained a frugal lifestyle, investing almost everything back into the business and education funds for the boys. "Mom, Tyler has a swimming pool in his house," Malcolm observed while setting the table for dinner, "and 2 PlayStations." "That's nice for Tyler," Letitia replied evenly, serving the simple but nutritious meal she had prepared. "Why don't we have those things if you're a boss?" Malcolm persisted, his blue eyes, so unsettlingly like Richard's, fixed inquisitively on her face. Letitia sat down, considering her answer carefully. "Because we're building something more important than swimming pools. Every dollar I save now becomes $10 for your future." "For college?" Martin asked, always quick to connect concepts. "For college, for opportunities, for choices," Letitia confirmed. "Sometimes success isn't about what you buy, but what you build." Later that night, after homework supervision and bedtime stories, Letitia reviewed architectural plans for their most ambitious project yet, the revitalization of an entire city block in downtown Atlanta. The proposal would put them in direct competition with several established developers, including the Whitfield Group. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Forbes reporter called. "They're considering you for their Visionaries in Business cover." Letitia stared at the message, remembering Richard's cruel dismissal. "You have no formal education, no connections, nothing to offer." Her finger hovered over a business news app on her phone. She rarely allowed herself to search for information about Richard, but tonight she made an exception. The search returned recent photos from a charity gala, Richard looking older and slightly heavier, standing beside his blonde socialite wife. According to the caption, the Whitfield Group had recently secured financing for a luxury high-rise called the Peachtree Summit. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Jenkins, now a permanent fixture in their lives, peeked in. "You're working too late again?" "Just finishing up," Letitia promised. "That young lawyer called again," Mrs. Jenkins mentioned casually. "3rd time this month." Letitia shook her head. "I don't have time for dating, Mrs. Jenkins." "All work and no life makes for a lonely success," the older woman cautioned. The next morning's executive meeting would determine the corporation's future direction. Gathered around the conference table, her senior team presented arguments for cautious expansion versus the bold downtown project. "The downtown block would position us as major players," her development director argued, "but it puts us in direct competition with Whitfield Group." "We've avoided crossing paths with them so far," her CFO noted. "They play hardball and have deep political connections." Letitia studied the property maps spread before her. "It's time we showed Atlanta who we really are," she decided. "Prepare our bid for the downtown project." That evening, declining yet another dinner invitation from the persistent lawyer, Letitia arrived home to find the boys gathered at the kitchen table, unusual seriousness on their identical faces. "We have a question," Malcolm announced, clearly the designated spokesperson. "I'm listening," Letitia said, setting down her briefcase. "Why don't we have a dad?" Martin asked directly. "Everyone else has one." The question she had been preparing for since their birth still caught her unprepared. Letitia sat down, choosing her words carefully. Some families have a mom and dad. Some have two moms or two dads. Some, like ours, have one parent who loves enough for two, she explained gently. But where is our dad? Marcus pressed, his artistic sensitivity making him more emotionally perceptive than his brothers. He made a choice not to be part of our family, Letitia answered honestly. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt others, but that doesn't reflect on you. You three are the best things that ever happened to me. Later, reviewing the blueprints for what would become the Morgan Community Plaza, Letitia felt the weight of the confrontation that lay ahead. By signing the contract that would put her company in direct competition with the Whitfield empire, she couldn't know that within just 1 year, she would be receiving a gold-embossed invitation to the grand opening of Richard's new skyscraper, the perfect stage for the meeting she had been planning for 6 long years. The downtown Atlanta skyline had changed dramatically over the past year, with the Morgan Community Plaza standing as a testament to Letitia's vision. 42 affordable housing units, a community health center, and retail spaces exclusively leased to Black-owned businesses. From her corner office on the 48th floor of Atlanta's business district, Letitia Morgan surveyed her growing empire, the Morgan Community Development Corporation, now valued at $280 million. Ms. Morgan, Jasmine's voice came through the intercom, the final projections for the West Side project are ready for your review. Thank you, Jasmine. Could you bring them in? Letitia replied, turning from the window. At 36, Letitia had transformed completely from the desperate single mother who once counted pennies for bus fare. Today, she wore a tailored Armani suit in deep navy, her hair styled in elegant twists, subtle diamond studs in her ears, each element projecting the power she had methodically accumulated. Jasmine entered with a slim leather portfolio. Also, this arrived by courier, marked personal. She handed over a heavy cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. Letitia immediately recognized the elaborate W seal. Her heart accelerated slightly as she took the envelope, maintaining her composed expression. Thank you. That will be all for now. Alone, Letitia examined the envelope, turning it over in her hands before carefully breaking the seal. Inside was an invitation printed on thick cardstock. Mr. Richard Whitfield and the Whitfield Group request the honor of your presence at the grand opening of the Peachtree Summit, Atlanta's newest architectural achievement. The date was 3 weeks away. A handwritten note on heavy stationery was paper-clipped to the invitation. The past need not define the future. Your presence would be appreciated. Eleanor Whitfield. Letitia's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. Eleanor Whitfield, now 71, had apparently decided it was time for a reconciliation, or perhaps a reconnaissance mission. Either way, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. She pressed the intercom. Jasmine, please contact Hunter Investigations. I need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. 2 days later, Letitia sat across from Diana Hunter, a former FBI agent who now ran Atlanta's most discreet investigative firm. I need comprehensive intelligence on the current state of the Whitfield Group, Letitia explained. Financial position, major investors, board dynamics, and personal information on Richard Whitfield and his family. Hunter nodded, making notes. Anything specific you're looking for? Vulnerabilities, Letitia replied simply. And I need samples for DNA testing. Hunter raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. Professionals in her line understood discretion. That evening, Letitia arrived home earlier than usual. The triplets, now 6 years old and nearly identical except for subtle differences only a mother could distinguish, were completing homework at the kitchen table under Mrs. Jenkins' watchful eye. "Mom!" they called in unison, running to greet her with hugs. "How are my brilliant boys today?" Letitia asked, kissing each forehead. "I solved all the bonus math problems," Malcolm announced proudly. "My poem got selected for the school magazine," Martin added. "I learned a new Chopin piece," Marcus said, not to be outdone. Later, after homework review and dinner, When the boys were engrossed in their reading, Mrs. Jenkins approached Letitia with knowing eyes. "Something's brewing," the older woman observed. "You've got that look." Letitia smiled. "It's time, Mrs. Jenkins. The invitation arrived today." No further explanation was needed. Mrs. Jenkins had been there from the beginning, had witnessed every struggle and triumph. "Are you ready for what comes after?" she asked softly. Letitia paused. "I've been preparing for 6 years." The following weeks moved with calculated precision. Hunter's investigation revealed exactly what Letitia had suspected. The Peachtree Summit had exceeded its budget by over $200 million, putting the Whitfield Group in a precarious position with investors. Richard's marriage to Vanessa, daughter of Senator Campbell, appeared stable on the surface but was reportedly strained. Simultaneously, Letitia met with her financial team to implement the next phase of her plan. "We can acquire up to 30% of Whitfield Group shares through various holding companies before anyone connects them back to us," her financial advisor confirmed. "But once we reach that threshold, we'll have to disclose." "Perfect," Letitia nodded. "Begin immediately." The DNA results arrived in a sealed envelope. Letitia didn't need to open it. She knew what it would confirm. The sample collected from a water glass Richard had used at a business conference matched the boys perfectly. The document joined the growing portfolio of evidence she was assembling. 1 week before the Peachtree Summit opening, Letitia took the boys to an exclusive children's boutique. "Why do we need fancy suits?" Malcolm questioned as the tailor measured him. "We're attending an important event," Letitia explained. "People will be watching us closely." "Is it for business?" Martin asked perceptively. Letitia considered her answer carefully. "It's about our future." The navy suits were selected specifically to highlight the boys' striking blue eyes that would be impossible for anyone to misidentify. The evening before the event, Letitia stood in her walk-in closet, contemplating her choice. The red dress hung in isolation, custom-made, elegant, yet bold, a statement of power rather than seduction. Next to it, 3 small garment bags contained the boys' suits, pressed and perfect. Her phone rang. Diana Hunter with final intelligence. "The guest list includes every major player in Atlanta business and politics," Hunter reported. "Richard will be accompanied by his wife and mother. Security will be tight but focused on external threats, not internal drama." "Excellent," Letitia replied. "And the other matter?" "The legal documents are prepared as requested. The copies of the original testamentary clause, the DNA confirmation, and the financial analysis of Whitfield Group's vulnerabilities, all compiled in the portfolio as you specified." Letitia ended the call, a sense of calm settling over her. 6 years of planning, building, and waiting were about to culminate. She had transformed from a desperate, pregnant housekeeper with $10,000 in hush money into a business force commanding hundreds of millions in assets. But tomorrow wasn't just about financial victory. It was about recognition, about truth, about her sons claiming their rightful place. In her bedroom, Letitia paused before a framed photograph of her mother, the only personal item displayed in her otherwise minimalist sanctuary. "Tomorrow, Mom," she whispered. "Tomorrow the circle closes." While adjusting Marcus's bow tie on his small suit, Letitia couldn't imagine that the confrontation planned for years would be just the beginning of a storm that would transform not only her life and Richard's, but completely redefine the meaning of justice and redemption for both of them. The Peachtree Summit dominated Atlanta's night skyline, its 68 floors illuminated like a beacon of wealth and privilege. Limousines and luxury cars formed an elegant procession at the entrance, discharging the city's elite onto a red carpet flanked by photographers. Security personnel with discreet earpieces monitored the perimeter, their attention focused on potential external threats rather than the storm about to break within. Inside the soaring main lobby, Richard Whitfield, resplendent in a custom tuxedo, moved through the crowd with practiced charm. At 48, he still cut an impressive figure, his salt and pepper hair conveying distinguished authority, his athletic frame maintained by expensive personal trainers. Yet those who knew him well might have detected new lines of strain around his eyes, the slight tightness in his smile betraying the financial pressure the Peachtree Summit had placed on his company. "Richard, darling." His wife Vanessa appeared at his side, a vision in pale gold Chanel, her blonde hair arranged in an elegant updo adorned with family diamonds. "Senator Mitchell is asking about the sustainability features." "I'll be right there," Richard assured her, pausing to accept a fresh glass of champagne from a passing server. Across the room, Eleanor Whitfield held court among a circle of Atlanta's old money. At 71, she remained a formidable presence, her posture regal despite her advancing years. Her silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon. She surveyed the gathering with the critical eye of a general assessing troops, occasionally nodding approvingly at particularly influential guests. At precisely 9 o'clock, a subtle but distinct shift in energy rippled through the crowd. Conversation faltered as heads turned toward the grand entrance. Photographers who had been casually documenting the event suddenly focused their cameras with renewed interest. Letitia Morgan stood framed in the doorway, a vision in crimson. The custom-designed dress hugged her curves before falling in elegant folds to the floor, its color a deliberate statement of power and confidence. Her dark hair cascaded in soft waves over her exposed shoulders, and discreet but unmistakably expensive jewelry complemented her appearance. But what drew every eye in the room were her companions, 3 identical boys in perfectly tailored navy suits, walking with remarkable poise for 6-year-olds. Richard, midway through explaining financing details to an investor, stopped mid-sentence. The champagne flute trembled visibly in his hand, amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Richard, are you all right?" Vanessa asked, following his gaze. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He didn't answer, couldn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the 3 small figures, specifically on their eyes, perfect replicas of his own distinctive blue, a genetic signature impossible to mistake. Letitia advanced through the room with regal composure, acknowledging greetings from business associates who recognized her immediately. The Morgan Community Development Corporation had become a respected force in Atlanta's business community, and many present had either collaborated with Letitia or observed her meteoric rise with interest. "Ms. Morgan, I didn't expect to see you tonight," exclaimed a prominent bank president. "The Morgan Plaza project is extraordinary. Such vision." "Thank you, Charles." Letitia smiled warmly. "The boys and I wouldn't miss this architectural milestone. Atlanta deserves beautiful buildings that serve all its citizens." The subtle emphasis on all wasn't lost on those familiar with her company's mission. With each step through the crowded room, Letitia felt years of calculated patience crystallizing into this perfect moment. The boys, coached thoroughly on etiquette, responded with impeccable manners to introductions, their identical faces serious and observant. Inevitably, the currents of the room brought them face to face with Richard, who stood rooted in place as if confronting an apparition. Vanessa hovered uncertainly at his side, confusion evident in her expression. "Richard Whitfield," Letitia pronounced with melodious confidence. "How long it's been?" He struggled visibly to regain his composure. "Letitia, I didn't expect to see you here." "Your mother sent the invitation personally," she replied with a measured smile. "I believe Eleanor always had a sense of poetic justice." Richard's eyes darted nervously to the 3 boys, who regarded him with undisguised curiosity. "Boys," Letitia said softly, "this is Richard Whitfield, the host of tonight's event." With perfect synchronization, the triplets extended their small hands. "Pleased to meet you, sir," they said in unison, their voices clear and confident. Richard mechanically shook each tiny hand, his face growing increasingly pale as he looked into 3 pairs of eyes identical to his own. "They're 6 years old," Letitia continued conversationally. "Malcolm already solves college-level equations. Martin writes poetry that moved his literature teacher to tears, and Marcus plays piano as though he was born for it. A few feet away, Eleanor Whitfield observed the unfolding scene with an inscrutable expression, her posture rigid, her knuckles white around her champagne flute. "I'm surprised you don't recognize your own sons, Richard," Letitia said, her voice low but perfectly audible to those nearby, especially when they're the spitting image of what you could have been if you had a heart. Vanessa, approaching with 2 fresh champagne glasses, stopped abruptly. "Richard? What is she talking about?" The murmuring around them intensified as people began to notice the uncanny resemblance between the boys and Richard. "This is neither the time nor place," Richard hissed, color now alternating between pallor and flushed anger in his face. "I agree," Letitia responded tranquilly. "The time was 6 years ago, when you threw me out of your life with $10,000 and the promise to destroy me if I tried to claim your children's rights." A circle of silence formed around them. Vanessa took a step backward, her eyes widening with dawning comprehension. "You have no proof," Richard muttered, but uncertainty wavered in his voice. Letitia smiled, a genuine smile of someone who had waited long for this moment. "Actually, I do." She made a subtle gesture, and her assistant approached with an elegant portfolio, including DNA tests conducted without your knowledge, thanks to a glass you used at a business conference last year, and of course your father's original will. Eleanor Whitfield dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to punctuate Letitia's revelation. "You must be wondering how I built an empire from nothing," Letitia continued, her voice now projected for all to hear. "I used those insulting $10,000 to found an organization that today is worth more than your struggling company, Richard, and I did it while raising 3 exceptional children alone." Richard attempted to regain control. "What do you want? Money?" Letitia laughed, a crystalline, genuinely amused sound. "Your sons didn't come here to beg for your acknowledgement, but to witness the truth your family tried to bury along with the dignity you never possessed. And as for money," she glanced around the luxurious hall, "my company has acquired 30% of Whitfield Group shares over the past 6 months. Your investors are nervous, Richard." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Journalists present were already furiously typing on their smartphones. "You can't do this," Richard whispered, now truly shaken. "I already have," Letitia replied. "While you were building skyscrapers to feed your ego, I built entire communities that heal and elevate the people you always considered invisible. And guess what? It's more profitable." While the flashes of smartphones illuminated the shocked faces of guests, no one could predict that this public confrontation would not be the climax of Letitia and Richard's story, but merely the first act of a transformation that would challenge everything both believed about vengeance, redemption, and the true meaning of legacy. The murmurs in the grand hall of the Peachtree Summit transformed into a cacophony of whispers and hurried phone calls as Letitia's words hung in the air. Richard stood frozen, his world collapsing in slow motion around him as photographers discreetly captured the moment that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. "This isn't over," Richard managed through clenched teeth before Vanessa pulled him away, her face a mask of controlled fury and humiliation. The next morning, Atlanta awakened to a media frenzy. CEO billionaire confronted by ex-housekeeper and secret sons blared the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's headline. The video of the confrontation, captured on countless smartphones, had gone viral overnight, accumulating millions of views across social platforms. In her sunlit kitchen, Letitia flipped golden pancakes while Malcolm set the table, Martin poured juice, and Marcus arranged napkins into perfect triangles. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the counter, media requests and business inquiries multiplying by the minute. "These smell amazing, Mom," Malcolm said, climbing onto his chair as Letitia served breakfast. She watched them eat, these 3 perfect beings who had given her life purpose beyond revenge. The moment of truth couldn't be delayed any longer. "Boys, I need to tell you something important about the man we met last night, Letitia began, choosing her words with care. The triplets looked up simultaneously, their blue eyes, Richard's eyes, focused intently on her face. "That man, Mr. Whitfield, is your father," she said gently. Malcolm, ever analytical, processed this first. "The man from the building opening? He's our dad?" "Yes," Letitia confirmed, watching their expressions carefully. "Why doesn't he live with us?" Martin asked, his writer's mind immediately seeking the narrative. Letitia took a deep breath. "When I told him I was pregnant with you three, he made a choice not to be part of our family. He didn't want us." Marcus's voice trembled slightly, his sensitive nature always quickest to emotional insight. Letitia gathered them into her arms. "He didn't know what he was giving up. That was his greatest loss, not ours. We've built something beautiful together, just the four of us." Across town, the Whitfield Group headquarters had descended into chaos. Richard barricaded himself in his office while crisis managers attempted to control the public relations disaster. His phone rang constantly with calls from board members and investors demanding explanations. Eleanor Whitfield sat rigidly in the boardroom, watching her son pace like a caged animal. "You betrayed me," Richard accused, turning on his mother. "You gave her that testamentary clause." "I gave her a copy," Eleanor corrected coldly, "to ensure she'd keep her distance. I never imagined she'd use it to build an empire rather than for simple extortion. I underestimated her intellect." "You thought you were protecting the Whitfield name? Look what's happened now." Richard gestured wildly at the news playing silently on the wall-mounted television, showing side-by-side images of him and the triplets, the resemblance undeniable. "You were always weak, Richard," Eleanor said with contempt. "Your father knew it. I merely tried to clean up your mess, as I've always done." The office door burst open as Vanessa entered, her face tear-stained but composed. "I'm taking Caroline to my parents' house," she announced, referring to their 3-year-old daughter. "I won't have her exposed to this media circus." "Vanessa, please," Richard began, but she cut him off. "You lied to me from the beginning. Those boys are clearly yours. Anyone with eyes can see it. Were there others? Other women? Other children?" Her voice broke slightly before she regained control. "My father warned me about your reputation, but I defended you." As Vanessa departed, Richard's secretary announced over the intercom, "Ms. Morgan is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Richard froze momentarily before straightening his tie. "Send her in." Letitia entered, transformed from the previous night's crimson vision to a power player in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. 6 years ago, she had stood in this same office as a housekeeper, terrified of losing her job. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. "I've come to present my formal proposal," she announced, placing a leather portfolio on his desk. "The Morgan CDC will acquire majority control of the Whitfield Group. You'll retain your position as CEO for 2 years, under supervision of our board." Richard laughed bitterly. "You've really destroyed me." "No, Richard. You destroyed yourself when you believed your money and your surname made you superior to others." She opened the portfolio. "I also require legal recognition of the boys as your heirs and the reinstatement of the educational scholarship for African American students that your father established and that Eleanor secretly canceled. And if I refuse, then I'll use my position as major shareholder to force a vote of no confidence. You'll lose everything within weeks." Richard studied the woman before him, confident, powerful, implacable. How had he not seen her potential that day? Had his prejudice and arrogance blinded him so completely? "Why didn't you sue me for child support years ago?" he asked. "It would have been easier." Letitia smiled. "Because I didn't want your money, Richard. I wanted to prove you were wrong about me, about everything." 2 weeks later, after extensive negotiations, the agreement was formalized. Richard legally recognized paternity of the triplets, and the Educational Foundation was reinstated with a $50 million fund. When he attempted to schedule visits with the boys, Letitia was firm. They need time. You're a stranger to them. If you're genuinely interested in knowing them, you'll need to be patient and respectful." "I have rights," Richard insisted. "You had responsibilities," Letitia corrected. "Rights need to be earned." The agreement signed that afternoon would seal the financial fate of the Whitfields, but no one could predict that. As Letitia walked triumphantly out of the office, seeds of an unlikely redemption were already beginning to germinate in the depths of Richard's broken soul. The agreement signed with Richard marked the beginning of a new chapter, but as Letitia drove away from the Whitfield Group headquarters, she felt strangely hollow. The triumph she had anticipated for 6 years tasted different than expected, more complex than sweet. 6 months later, that complexity had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. The newly formed Morgan Whitfield Corporation headquarters occupied the 32nd floor of a gleaming tower in downtown Atlanta. The merged logo, an elegant combination of both family names, symbolized not reconciliation but a pragmatic business alliance that had quickly become the talk of the commercial real estate world. Letitia, now firmly established as CEO, led the morning board meeting with characteristic precision. "The East Side Community Project is ahead of schedule and under budget," she explained, gesturing toward projection slides. "We've already pre-leased 70% of the commercial spaces to minority-owned businesses." From his seat at the far end of the table, Richard listened silently. The past 6 months had humbled him visibly, the arrogance drained from his posture, replaced by a watchfulness that sometimes bordered on discomfort. He rarely spoke during these meetings, instead observing how Letitia seamlessly integrated Whitfield's luxury development expertise with her community-centered approach. "Richard," Letitia said, surprising everyone by directly addressing him, "would you share your thoughts on the sustainability features? That was always your specialty." He straightened, momentarily caught off guard by her professional courtesy. "The solar array design is innovative," he offered, his voice lacking its former commanding tone. "But I think we could expand it further without compromising aesthetics." Letitia nodded. "Make it happen." Later that afternoon, Richard stood awkwardly in Letitia's living room. It was his first supervised visit with the Triplets, arranged after weeks of negotiations through lawyers. "They'll be home from piano lessons shortly," Letitia explained, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. When the boys burst through the door, they stopped abruptly at the sight of Richard. Malcolm scrutinized him with analytical detachment, Martin observed his body language with a writer's attention to detail, and Marcus simply stared at the stranger who shared his eyes. "Boys, Mr. Whitfield has come to spend some time with you, as we discussed," Letitia explained carefully. "Why should we call him father?" Malcolm challenged directly. "He never wanted to be our father." Richard flinched visibly. I've brought some gifts," he said, gesturing to elegantly wrapped packages on the coffee table. Letitia intervened gently. "They don't need things, Richard. They need consistency, presence, genuine interest in who they are." The awkward visit ended early, with Richard promising to return the following week. As he left, Letitia caught a glimpse of genuine pain in his eyes, the first authentic emotion she'd seen from him that wasn't anger or pride. 3 weeks later, Eleanor Whitfield suffered a severe stroke. Despite their complicated relationship, Richard maintained a bedside vigil at Piedmont Hospital, where Letitia found him one evening, having come to deliver documents requiring his signature. "The doctors say she might never regain speech," Richard said, looking older than his years under the harsh hospital lighting. Letitia sat beside him, maintaining professional distance. "I'm sorry. Whatever our differences, she's your mother." "She told me something before she lost consciousness," Richard continued, his voice hollow, "about my father. Apparently, I wasn't the first Whitfield man to abandon his children." "What do you mean?" "My father had other children, from affairs. Eleanor covered it up, paid women off, hid documents." He laughed bitterly. "I became exactly what she conditioned me to be, a Whitfield man who treats women and children as disposable. For the first time, Letitia glimpsed the generational damage behind Richard's cruelty, not an excuse, but a context she hadn't considered. Meanwhile, the triplets were processing their complex new reality. At school, they faced curious questions and occasional cruelty as their story became public knowledge. Jeremy said, "We're not real Whitfields because our mom was just the maid," Martin told Letitia one evening. Letitia sat with them at the kitchen table. "Your worth isn't determined by anyone's last name. It's built through your actions, your kindness, your contributions to the world." "But everyone knows now," Marcus said quietly. "They look at us differently." As autumn turned to winter, Letitia found herself in an unexpected position, mediating the beginning of a tentative relationship between her sons and their father. Richard, stripped of his arrogance, was making genuine if awkward attempts to connect with the boys. One evening, after the triplets were asleep, Letitia visited Mrs. Jenkins, seeking the wisdom that had guided her through the darkest times. "I achieved everything I wanted," Letitia confessed, cradling a cup of tea. "So why don't I feel complete?" Mrs. Jenkins studied her thoughtfully. "Because revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, child. It keeps you chained to the very person who hurt you." The following week, Richard and Letitia met to discuss the boys' education. To her surprise, he arrived with an old leather-bound album. "Family photographs," he explained awkwardly. "I thought they might want to know where they come from, for better or worse." "Why this sudden interest in being a father?" Letitia asked directly. "Because losing everything made me see what actually matters," he answered with unexpected honesty. "I'm not asking for forgiveness I don't deserve. I'm just trying to be better than the man who rejected them." Later that week, Letitia visited her mother's grave, placing fresh flowers against the simple headstone. "I built everything we dreamed of, Mom," she whispered. "A business, security for the boys, even justice against the man who threw us away. But something still feels unfinished." That evening during dinner, Malcolm suddenly asked, "Mom, what does it mean to forgive someone?" The question caught Letitia off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Ms. Reynolds taught us that holding on to anger hurts us more than the person we're angry at," Martin explained. "Is that why you're still sad sometimes?" Marcus added perceptively. "Because you're angry at our father?" As she looked at their young faces, so wise beyond their years, Letitia realized that perhaps the greatest revolution wasn't in the buildings she constructed or the empire she commanded, but in breaking cycles of pain that had defined both her and Richard's families for generations. While observing her sleeping triplets that night, Letitia couldn't imagine that the true revolution was still to come, not in the skyscrapers she built or the empire she commanded, but in the extraordinary healing journey that would transform mortal enemies into unexpected allies in the mission of creating a legacy greater than any fortune. The one-year anniversary of the corporate merger dawned with a crystalline autumn sky over Atlanta. Letitia stood at the lectern on the temporary stage erected in Grant Park, the morning sun glinting off the ceremonial shovel beside her. Before her gathered an unlikely assembly: corporate executives in tailored suits, community activists in casual attire, and families from neighborhoods once dismissed as unsalvageable. Today we break ground not just on a building, but on a new vision of what business can achieve, Letitia announced, her voice carrying across the crowd. The Morgan Whitfield Foundation begins with a commitment of $100 million dedicated to education, housing, and opportunity for those who have been systematically excluded from Atlanta's prosperity. From his position at the edge of the stage, Richard watched her, not with the resentment that had characterized their early forced collaboration, but with a grudging respect that had gradually evolved over months of witnessing her leadership. His own transformation remained a work in progress, the journey from entitled CEO to humbled co-founder marked by painful self-reflection. The foundation launch coincided with another significant milestone, the triplets' 8th birthday celebration planned for that evening. For the first time, Richard had been invited not just for a supervised visit, but as a participant in a family gathering, albeit one with carefully defined boundaries. As twilight descended, Letitia's backyard transformed under strings of fairy lights. Unlike the ostentatious displays of wealth that had once defined Richard's world, the celebration carried a warmth that money alone could never purchase. Children's laughter blended with conversation as guests arrived, Mrs. Jenkins directing the catering staff with grandmotherly authority, the boys' teachers bearing thoughtfully chosen gifts, and neighbors bringing homemade contributions. Richard arrived precisely on time, hesitating momentarily at the gate. The small gift bag in his hand contained 3 books, a mathematics biography for Malcolm, a collection of poetry for Martin, and musical theory for Marcus, each selected after careful research into their individual interests. "You came," Letitia acknowledged, greeting him with professional courtesy that had softened imperceptibly over recent months. "Thank you for allowing me to be here," he replied, the humility in his voice still an adjustment for both of them. Across the lawn, a nurse helped Eleanor Whitfield from her wheelchair into a garden chair. The stroke had left the once formidable matriarch physically diminished but mentally sharp. Her inclusion in the celebration had been perhaps the most surprising evolution in their complicated family narrative. The evening's emotional center arrived when the boys presented their talents. Malcolm demonstrated a mathematical proof that left adults murmuring in amazement. Martin recited an original poem about family that brought unexpected tears to several eyes. Marcus performed a complex piano piece with the mature interpretation of someone thrice his age. Standing at the back of the impromptu audience, Letitia experienced a powerful flashback, herself in her housekeeping uniform, scrubbing the Whitfield mansion's floors while 7 months pregnant, invisible to the wealthy family whose lives intersected with hers in ways they couldn't then imagine. The contrast between that moment and the present, her standing as a respected business leader surrounded by a community that valued her, felt like poetic justice beyond what revenge alone could have achieved. After the cake cutting, and when the excitement had momentarily quieted, Richard unexpectedly asked to speak. The gathering fell silent, everyone aware of the complex history between host and guest. "I don't deserve to stand before you today," he began, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "And I certainly haven't earned the title of father to 3 extraordinary young men who have thrived not because of me, but despite my absence." The triplets exchanged glances, their identical blue eyes assessing him with a maturity beyond their years. "I can't undo the choices I made," Richard continued, "but I hope, perhaps, to demonstrate through consistent actions that people can change, that I can change, not to erase the past, but to contribute something worthwhile to your futures." A subtle nod from Malcolm, a thoughtful tilt of Martin's head, and a barely perceptible softening in Marcus's expression offered neither forgiveness nor rejection, merely acknowledgement of his words and willingness to observe his actions going forward. Later, as guests departed and the boys helped gather discarded wrapping paper, Letitia found herself momentarily alone with Eleanor. "I spent a lifetime protecting a lie," the older woman said, her speech slightly slurred from the stroke. "You built your life on truth. That's why you succeeded where I ultimately failed." Near the evening's end, Letitia and Richard stood at opposite sides of the yard watching the triplets excitedly explore their gifts. "We'll never be a conventional family," Letitia observed, "but perhaps we can create something meaningful from what we have." Richard nodded. "Something better than what came before us." The following morning, Letitia took the boys to visit their original apartment building, now transformed into the first Morgan Whitfield Foundation housing project. The small unit where she had once brought them home as fragile premature infants had been renovated but preserved as the building's heritage centerpiece. "This is where we started," she explained, opening the door to the apartment now furnished as a community space. When you were tiny babies, I sat in a chair right here and promised we would build something extraordinary together." Malcolm ran his hand along the windowsill. "You kept your promise. Is that why you named the learning center after Mrs. Jenkins?" Martin asked, pointing to the newly installed sign on the building across the street. Letitia nodded, because she believed in us when no one else did. As the triplets raced ahead to explore the new playground constructed where broken concrete once dominated the landscape, Letitia understood that her true legacy wasn't in the buildings she had erected or the fortune she had accumulated, but in the most valuable lesson she could pass to her sons, that the power to transform rejection into purpose transcends any vengeance, and that sometimes the greatest triumph isn't defeating an enemy but transforming an entire system that allowed injustice to flourish in the first place. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.